Welcome back, everybody, to 31 1990s horror movies for Halloween, where I'm taking a look at my favorite horror movies from the 1990s. We're going back to Hong Kong with our number 20 spot, and this is starring the same guy who starred in The Untold Story, and I believe it was directed by the same guy. Don't quote me on that, though. I probably should double-check that, but anyway, let's move on. So at number 20, we have Ebola Syndrome.
Lots of big bows.
So yes, this movie has Anthony Wong, who also starred in The Untold Story. This movie has some similar aspects to The Untold Story, but I like it more than The Untold Story, but both movies I think are very good. Ebola Syndrome is sort of a serial killer movie mixed with a disease movie. It's a very dark movie. It's a very gross movie at times, but in the best possible way. You have this character who is a scumbag, and he is essentially a serial killer. But the thing about him is he ends up taking this odd job where he goes to this tribe somewhere that has a rash of Ebola going around. He ends up catching Ebola. But here's the interesting thing. He's one of the rare cases that is immune to Ebola. It's a very rare case for someone to be immune to Ebola, just like it's very rare for someone to be immune to AIDS. So he can carry the virus without being affected by the virus. So he's a carrier of Ebola. He can spread Ebola without suffering any of the symptoms of Ebola. So you have this guy who's a serial killer, essentially going around and unknowingly spreading Ebola amongst the population. Now, this movie does take the idea of Ebola to an extreme, but when you read up on Ebola and what it does, it's horrifying. So it may not go as far as what it does in this movie, but it still goes far, and it's unpleasant. If you want to look it up, go right ahead, just don't eat before you look into it. But it's such an interesting movie, because you have this guy who is a scumbag. He's killing people, he's doing all these horrible things, and he's also unknowingly spreading Ebola. So you have these detectives, they're trying to solve a crime, and also trying to find out how Ebola is spreading. It gets so gnarly in certain points, too. This is... I don't know off the top of my head if it's another Cat 3 film, but I think it might be. If I'm wrong, correct me on that in the comments. If I'm right, let me know in the comments, because I'd like to know whether I'm right and wrong. So leave that down below. But anyway, so yeah, this movie, it's another one of those movies that's not afraid to go there. It's not afraid to be dirty. It's not afraid to be gritty. It's not afraid to be very mean-spirited. But the whole idea is, like, you have two stories going on here, and both are equally as devastating. A serial killer movie and an outbreak movie going on at the same time. And they're both connected because the killer is the one who's unknowingly spreading the virus. It's such a unique way to do a movie like this. The main character is terrifying. I would say that he is scarier in The Untold Story, but I think this story is more interesting because it gives a unique twist to a movie like this. But what's especially devastating is that we're dealing with Ebola here, and Ebola is spreading like wildfire amongst the population in this movie. There are characters who get Ebola that we are rooting for. We're like, yeah, we want you to get out of this alive, and then they get Ebola. There are people out there who, they accomplish a goal, but you know they're not going to have a happy ending because they have Ebola. It's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of movie, because you have this threat of Ebola around, and it's just, oh god, it's so intense, and it's so suspenseful too, because you don't know if he's going to infect somebody else, and of course, he'll infect one person, they won't know that they're infected, and then they'll spread it to another person. It creates this unbearable state of paranoia. Who's this guy going to kill? And who's he going to give Ebola to? The last act of this movie is insane. I am going to give a little bit of a spoiler here, but I won't spoil too much, because we know eventually we're going to learn that this guy has Ebola. So eventually people piece things together. They know he's a killer and they know he has Ebola, but they can't get him. And there's this point where he cuts himself and he starts spraying blood at people, and they're trying not to get it on him because they don't want to get Ebola. It's an absolutely insane moment, and I won't go much further than that. It's a mild spoiler to get you interested in the movie. It gets even crazier from there. But yes, this is such a good movie and such a tragic movie, and it's just wild because you have serial killer and Ebola. Two very terrifying things mixed together for one hell of a time. This is the same thing along the lines of The Untold Story, but I think this one is a little easier to watch than The Untold Story, so I do recommend watching this one for Halloween, especially if you're looking for a very unique serial killer kind of movie. Ebola Syndrome, a Hong Kong horror movie, one of my favorite Hong Kong horror movies. Absolutely gory, devastating in some points, very fun in some points. It's just a wild, wild movie, so if you want something that's so different from anything else that you will watch this Halloween, go watch Ebola Syndrome.
短少少咧。